Everyone, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. This is the last episode of May, which means that we are closing out Food Allergy Awareness and Celiac Disease Awareness Month. And I am excited to bring to you from across the pond my new friend, Clare Beach. She is UK based, London based, and she is the managing director of Azura Events. And she is a passionate advocate for inclusive, sustainable event planning, driven by her own experiences as a gluten-free neurodivergent attendee. And we got introduced via Miguel from Skift Meetings on a LinkedIn post. So I'm so excited to talk to you, Clare, to hear your story and to see where we can get what is the title of this thing that we called it today. Getting gluten-free right, why it's a responsibility for events and not a preference. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Tracy.
You're welcome. Okay, so tell me about, because I just mentioned Miguel in that post. Can you tell me about that post that you made and how we got connected to get to this story?
Okay, let's jump straight in.
Yes.
Great. So I essentially had a pretty disappointing and frustrating experience from a catering and neuro-inclusivity point of view at a couple of recent industry events. So by that I mean events organized by event professionals for event professionals, which you'd have thought we'd be pretty good at doing this. So my frustrating and disappointing experiences led me at the end of that conference to find myself sort of thinking, right, I have three options here. I have had enough. I've had years of this not going to plan and having really, not very pleasant experiences. So I have three options. I can either never attend any events ever again. I can micromanage my own attendance at any events that I do attend, which doesn't sound like a lot of fun either. Or I can do something about it. And after a period of time reflecting after those experiences, I decided that I need to do something about it. So I put a shout out on LinkedIn and asked if anybody in my network or their network knew people who were experts in dietaries and the sort of legalities and the responsibilities and just the best practice, for how to manage this. So with a view to bringing together a task force in the UK to begin with, and then who knows beyond that. We have formed a task force. We've had 2 meetings now. And
nice.
Yeah, it's very exciting to be doing something about the problem rather than just suffering ongoing.
Continuing to suffer. Yeah, exactly. I saw a video last week, or my friend shared it to me, of the Illinois senator who has introduced a bill in Illinois to require celiac and gluten-free training over and above allergy training, because she witnessed her newly diagnosed chief of staff eating out at a restaurant and what that challenge was for her. Yeah. And she had no clue about it beforehand, but then witnessed this. And so it's passed. It's actually going to the governor's office for signature to become law in the state of Illinois. I'm telling you that story because it ties into that feeling that you had, right? And what do we need to do right? What is your task force that you've come up with? What have you decided upon so far?
I think it all comes down to education for everybody that's involved. I've heard some horror stories from colleagues just this week about an event they were organising last week where the delegates really didn't help the situation.
Oh, really?
Our focus has been initially on, well, where is the communication breaking down? The delegates are providing in their registration form their dietary requirements. The planners are processing that information and deciding what, if anything, they're going to do with that, assuming they've even asked the question. Not everybody even asks the question in their registration form. And then they hopefully communicate that with the caterers and the venue and all the suppliers involved. And then they will hopefully discuss that and how that's going to look and how it's going to work on the day, and then check that it is working, how they discussed on the day, which again doesn't always happen. But the delegates play a big part in this. So, providing accurate information on the form to begin with, telling us that they do have a dietary requirement. We have people who don't even tell us and then wonder why we haven't been able to cater for them. But being accurate with that, and differentiating between it being a requirement as in an allergen or an intolerance or a preference. And, we've had discussions around the wording of that, so that we can get a more accurate picture of what we're dealing with. Is it just that somebody would prefer not to eat something because they don't like it? Or is this, a health and, life and death situation? So yeah, we're going to put together a checklist of all the different stages of the process to try and identify where the communication can fall down, because obviously sometimes it's perhaps temporary staff who have had very little training, who are the ones who are serving the food or dealing with the questions from the delegates, and there's a big lack of transfer of knowledge from their managers to the team on the day. It also requires our planners to appreciate what's involved in catering for all the different dietaries. So do you design menus that cater for everybody, or do you single out the different groups and have perhaps a different serving station? And every event will it will work better in some ways for other events. But then educating the delegates, if you have told us that you have an allergy or an intolerance, then that tells us that you're wanting us to cater for that. So when we then email you or contact you and say, here's where you pick up your special meal, or good news, you can eat everything on the menu today, or any other combination, or we provide you with a dietary card to put in your place setting at the dinner, come and collect it, use it. Otherwise we then end up in a situation where the caterers are going to all this effort and then the food doesn't get eaten, which is a waste. It's not great sustainably, and from a budgetary point of view, it's really not great.
Right. No, 100% agree. And I actually brought that up last week when I was speaking to MPI Minnesota. I'm like, how many of you, and it was related to kosher, how many of you pick up the phone and talk to the people who request kosher? Because how many of you have left kosher food just go to waste? And, I've saved my clients hundreds of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of dollars by asking that question, because like one gentleman can eat off the buffet as long as I label it correctly and let him know what's available. Another one who's Orthodox Jew needs that meal from the kosher caterer. But, but it does remind me of a woman who said, I want to manage my dietary needs on my own. And I'm like, but I'm here to feed you. And she's like, but I don't want to put that burden on you. And Amanda Whitehouse 2-3 weeks ago said, you need to listen and respect that. And I get that. But I also want to make sure that they know, hey, I'm here, or we're here to feed you if you need something. Right.
Yeah, definitely. And and it all comes down to how that person has probably been made to feel in the past at numerous events where they just don't trust anybody anymore.
Right.
And that's a shame that they've got to the point where they're actually just leave me out, they're self excluding themselves from that, from the food part of that event, which is sad.
Right. Exactly. All right. Because the title is, why it's a responsibility for events and not a preference. Can you, explain to me why you think it's a responsibility and not a preference for event professionals, based on you as being as an attendee that has a gluten intolerance versus and as well as being a planner.
Definitely. So I mean, the bottom line is that everybody has a right to eat at an event. If you're providing food for everybody, then everybody has a right to be a part of that. And they also have a right to feel included and welcomed and thought of, not just because you've got a special requirement, but, everybody wants to feel those things. It's part of, being part of society, isn't it? So I think the alternative, and I've definitely been on the receiving end of this, is feeling like you're a troublemaker, you're an inconvenience, and worse than that, possibly, is to not even be taken seriously. Which, having listened to many of your previous podcast guests, when you have a very, very serious allergy, that's not an option to not even be taken seriously. So yeah, I think therefore, if we are really in the business of being hospitable to people in the hospitality world, then those are really just no-brainers, aren't they? Like, to make people feel welcome and included is why we run events, and food is a big part of that.
Well, and you just said hospitality, but there's a statement that I've heard a couple of times before. It's like, we don't want to send people to the hospital because we're being trying in the hospitality industry. Those two words are connected, but we don't want to use the first word only, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and having been fed gluten in error at events in the past, for me personally, it leaves me feeling very unwell for several days. I feel really tired, and that's the physical symptoms. But emotionally and mentally, it makes you angry, it makes you frustrated, you feel disappointed, you don't trust people. The next time somebody says, oh yes, you can eat this, you're going to be, can I? Because that's what the last person said, and then I felt rotten for ages. So yeah,
I mean, and it is, it's like getting burned, right? Or getting glutened, and more accurately is like, you've gotten glutened, and then but you do have to go out for work. And one of the conversation that you and I had, when we first met over the phone too, is with your decisions, is like, I can't not go to these events because I lose out on the opportunity of growing my business. I lose out on the opportunity of networking, a variety of different things. You can't be people with dietary restrictions can't be hermits, right?
No,
we have to live our lives.
No,
right?
Exactly. And I mean, at the event that I was talking to you sort of straight afterwards a few months ago, I did end up having to go out and get my own food and manage my own catering, and that was the solution available to me then. And I know of plenty of other people who have had to do the same. And as an organizer of events, I would feel really, really sad if that became an option for one of my attendees, because we failed them. So yeah, that's not something I want to happen.
Right. So on that note, and then mentioning your task force and your checklist, what are some things that you all have already identified, or have you identified things, to even start with to make sure that this changes?
Yeah, I mean, I guess things that I've observed, I mean, it's great to learn from other people's mistakes often, isn't it?
Yes.
And how we don't want to do things. So what some of the really common things that I've seen happen that we've therefore learned from is, never assuming that attendees only have one dietary requirement. Like for me personally, I'm gluten-free and I'm pescatarian. So if we provide a dietary list with a name and their requirements, and
Mm-hmm.
perhaps somebody has split that out into 2 columns. So,
Mm-hmm.
gluten-free in one and pescatarian in the other, they are joined together next to my name. So the number of times that I've been given, for example, a gluten-free bread sandwich, and they're thinking, yay, we've done it, but it's got a meat filling. And it's like, well, why didn't somebody join the dots there? And,
Right.
again, you wonder why it's so complex,
Right.
why it's not being looked at in
Mm-hmm.
a sensible way.
Right.
And the same with labeling, at a recent event we had, again, they were very proud that they'd labeled the gluten-free sandwiches, but there was no information whatsoever about what the fillings were.
Oh,
So
meaning like inside the sandwich?
yeah. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, what are we meant to do with that?
Right.
You do just wonder.
Right.
And I think also just presenting the food, I've had, it's because quite often they've forgotten, or they realize they've got it wrong, and then they'll rush away and try and come up with a solution. And literally, I've been presented with 2 slices of bread, not even cut into a
Mm-hmm.
sandwich, just shoved on a plate. The sort of
Mm-hmm.
poor, sad dietary table in the corner somewhere that just looks,
Right.
but it's just sad. And also remembering that there are other dessert options other than fruit salad, which I'm sure you've come across many times.
Well, I shared one a couple of weeks ago. I was with with Mia and Kayla at a conference, and they did a video because they're 20 somethings and can do those videos on the fly. This is 2 gluten-free people eating dessert at a restaurant or at an event, and they were literally picking up with a fork a piece of melon, right, and
Yeah.
putting it in their mouth. I'm like, that's what they get. And can we be a little bit more? And I'm gonna
Creative.
right, yeah. I don't know if you've gotten this book, but
Okay.
she's from the UK, and it's up for a James Beard Award. But Katerina Sirmi, I had no intention of talking about her today, but making any recipe gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, or vegan, and it's mostly pastries, and they're so good. I made them for the holidays.
I have written it down. I will look it up. Thank you.
Yes. So it is. I'm like, why do we have to succumb to just eating a bowl of berries or a plate of melon? And I don't
there
like
are
melon.
so many options. And I think the other one, which my team, I can feel them almost on edge every
Mm-hmm.
service time, particularly, if we're eating together at our Congress dinner, and as a team, we do sit down at that point and join our delegates. And, typically I'm always the last to be served.
Mm-hmm.
Which I understand. Some catering managers, they like to do it very separately to make sure there's
Right.
no, risk. But there has to be ways of managing it so that it's not such a delay.
Right.
And I have been known to be sitting waiting while everyone else has finished their dish, because by this point I'm like, please start, because yours is going cold, and I'm still waiting for mine. So that's not great. That's not a lot of fun. It's not a lot of fun for me, but it's also very difficult for the people sitting with you, because they feel uncomfortable. And the last thing I want is for people to feel sorry for me. I just want to join in.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, you don't want them to feel sorry for you or to start asking you questions about why you eat a specific way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind that. I don't mind that so much, but yeah, I certainly don't want people feeling sorry for me. And then I think the other thing that I really want to tackle is having staff, and certainly sufficient numbers of staff on site who know how to explain the ingredients and the preparation methods that have been involved. Because a number of times I or my colleagues have said, can you confirm what's in this? Is it gluten-free? And people just say they don't know.
Right.
And if even if they don't know, or even if you're not able to equip everybody with that information. At least train the staff with a lovely sentence that says,
right.
I'm not the right person to speak to about this. However, if you could just wait a few minutes, I will go and get my colleague who will be able to help you with that question.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you could print that on a little card and have it on the
Right.
tray, or
Mm-hmm.
have in people's pockets so that they can, you know, read from it if necessary when the time
Right.
comes.
Yeah.
Because
Mm-hmm.
that makes me feel heard. It makes me feel supported. It makes
Mm-hmm.
me feel as though, again, I'm being taken seriously.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And if they're not the right person to ask, then they're going to go and find somebody who is. And I think that's a really big learning point.
Oh, I 100% agree. There is a, and I'm going to, before I show this, I'm going to say hello to Margaret, MI Gluten-Free Gal on Instagram, as well as Tara Samadi and Lifestylists have joined on Instagram, and my friend Teresa. Hello. But one of the things that I've done recently in the last 2 years at my conferences is for the past order. I mean, this is for labeling in general, and this matches the labeling, but I've created this name badge holder, right? And I created the label on it, and it lists the allergens and it's gluten-free. But what you just said to me gave me a new idea. It's like, let's, on the back of it, let's put how it's prepared.
Yeah.
And this is just, you know, pinned to the server's lapel, right?
Brilliant.
And so, and they love it. I mean, I've said this multiple times. I've had servers going, oh, I want to be the ahi tuna. I want to be the tater tot or whatever.
Yeah. You know, has it been cooked in oil that's been used for other for ingredients, or, you know, even if it is a separate oil, is it right next to the other one? You know, in which case it's probably still contaminated.
Right.
And often people haven't even considered that. You know, not only do they not know the answer, but they haven't even considered that, oh, there's an extra level to that I hadn't thought about. So
Yeah. And it's really hard, I think, too, when we're talking about that front of house staff who is temporary, right? They're not necessarily the A team that works there 40 hours a week. They may be the C team, but I think it's even more important for that C team to be trained to say, okay, let me go get, like you said, my colleague who can answer this question. Because they're, and one of my friends said this, you're a chef, but you're no better of a chef than you are without the front of house team.
Yeah.
Because they don't see you, right? Yeah. They're not interacting with you. Okay. So Joshua Powers just posted in here. Yes, that is such a good idea. Labeling and cross-contamination is so important. Yes, Joshua, 100% agree. And people don't, you know, even if it's the tongs, right? I mean, that's kind of that cross contact, you know, incident of picking up the tongs and using them for something else. Be cognizant of that, right?
Yeah. Have somebody standing by that station, or better still, you know, have somebody serving and making sure. But again, if the servers don't understand why, then you're on a losing battle already. You know, just because you've told them do not mix up the spoons in the bowls, or if you notice somebody, you know, if they don't fully understand the impact that could have on somebody's day, week, month, year, life, they're not going to appreciate it.
No, they're not. And it's like that story I told you at the very beginning of the senator from Illinois. I'm like, she didn't really think about it until her chief of staff had the challenge, right? And they were out together, and I think they handed her a grid and said, here, you figure out what you can eat.
Oh, the number of times. And even they are a different format every time. So you're having to, you know, you get handed an iPad or a clip file, or you've got to scan a QR code to go into some strange list that you've got to, you know, tick what your dietaries are, and then find that there's literally one item on the menu. But then I was in a restaurant in London last week, and they had, you know, the little gluten-free symbol at the bottom indicating that, you know, okay, so they're going to mark up things on the menu. And I looked at the menu and they hadn't. So I then had to have a conversation and say, well, surely that's gluten-free, you know, because there was nothing in it that told me that it should be a problem. But again, it was down to how it was prepared and the environment that it's prepared in. And the number of times I've had, oh, well, you can't eat that because that's rice, or you can't have that because that's potato. Sorry. You know, so just basic understanding
Right.
ingredients is lacking
Right.
a lot of the time.
Which begs to differ, or makes me wonder. I don't know, which makes me wonder probably. So you all have had the EU 1169, which is the regulations on food allergen labeling, which gluten is part of that, for 11 years now. Right. And so just making the requirement to label doesn't mean that it's being done
definitely not
accurately and or thought through in that whole process. Like, hey, great, maybe you sent your menu to your printer and put these codes on there, but you didn't think through the whole process?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I see in every part of the world that I travel to very inconsistent use of labeling. Okay, we acknowledge in different parts of the world it is required to be in different ways, but a lot of the time it's not fit for purpose at all.
Right. Yeah. Because it's there. It's kind of putting lipstick on a pig, right?
Yeah.
And making the pig look pretty, but it's not making sure that it's safe throughout the whole way. How do you think the industry education, I mean, there's education for servers and food service handlers around food allergies, right? In the States and in EU and things. But what about for industry, for meetings industry, event industry professionals, professional conference organizers? I mean, you have a company. So what do you think training would be for you all?
I mean, I think my team would probably say that just hanging out with me and seeing the horrendous situations I've been put in has been great training for them. They've lived experiences through me. And it's definitely made them so much more aware of the questions to ask and the impact that different outcomes can have. And again, coming back to how it makes people feel. But I think, I mean, certainly one thing that the dietary task force that we're setting up, we are going to put together some sort of checklist that will be aimed at planners and also at caterers and venues. And we're also considering, at the congresses that we run, creative ways that we can educate our delegates.
Okay.
Because, as I said earlier, they are an important part in how this all works. And if they don't understand the impact of their lack of communication, or them not going to pick up the meal that they've ordered, or deciding on the day that actually they're now not vegetarian because that roast beef looks really nice, or, and,
right.
And some of the stories are funny, but some of them are, really annoying from a budgetary point of view and from a food waste point of view.
Right.
So we're just, so I would love to know if any of your network have managed to successfully educate delegates in a creative, not in a you have to do this and you're really bad for doing that kind of way, but maybe we have a poster in our poster session about the impact. Maybe we use our opening ceremony as a get our sustainability committee chair to go and stand up and just say at the beginning of the Congress, right, okay, delegates, welcome, you've got a responsibility, and set out, in a fun way, how they can help.
Right.
I'd love to
I love
ideas.
that. I love that idea. And a couple of years ago, and it's probably been 6 or 7, we had a woman at a conference who was allergic to apples, and she couldn't be in the room with apples. And so we sent out an email, we put it on the event app as a pop-up, and the MC did a joke. This is the only apples allowed in the, in the event are MacBooks and iPhones and iPads and things like that. But that attendee, like, I share her quote all the time. She's like, you have no idea how grateful I am and what you did. But it really, that has that impact. But I think thinking through, we give those security briefings, right? Like we give them that would be a great aspect to add to our security briefings for all of our delegates, right? We're talking about active shooters or whatever. I'm like, this could potentially kill somebody right here, on the show floor for not in the same manner, but, but that would be a great thing to include in that safety information, whether you have it on your event app or doing a live conversation.
Definitely. I mean, from an inclusivity point of view, we have developed over the last couple of years what we call our Congress Guide.
Mm-hmm.
And it started out, actually, I was organising a family party last summer, and being a planner, of course, it was all in far too wordy and far too detailed. But essentially, the invitation that I sent out to family and friends was a sort of what to expect from the different parts of the party. And a family friend reached out and said, this is absolutely brilliant, because I am, she's neurodivergent like me, and it gave her the confidence to accept the invitation, understanding what was going to be happening and what to expect. So I took that feedback and worked with our communications manager for our events, and we've developed it into what is now our Congress Guide, and it is aimed at neurodivergent attendees, but also anybody that just, it could be somebody who's never been to an international congress before, or has never been to our international congress before, because there are things that are unique to each event, but also just people who like to plan, and this is one aspect of the neuro inclusive events toolkit that I've also been involved in developing and launching a couple of months ago. I think you're going to share the link
yes
at
I've
some
got
point.
Yep.
Little things like doing a video of how to get from the station to the venue, or from the airport to the venue. And if you can remove elements of anxiety for people, they're more likely to register, and they're more likely to actually turn up. And the same goes with dietary information. If we can provide menus in advance, it helps people to plan and to feel that they're going to be comfortable attending.
Right.
So yeah, there are lots of things that we can do to help people feel supported and ready to turn up.
Right, exactly. I'm typing in that neurodivergence guide. I hope I spelled that right. But okay, I got it posted. Yeah, so it is, I think it really does, because there are people, and especially maybe with kids, I'm going to say kids, young professionals who are just coming out of, school, college, and coming into the workforce, who've never come to a conference before, maybe have never traveled internationally or whatever, or domestically for that matter, right?
Yeah.
I think that adds a whole nother level of comfort for anyone in understanding that. And it does take a lot of due diligence on our part to think about, okay, well, how do I get from point A to point B, right? Or, but as a former transportation manager, graphic designer for the Olympics, I mean, we had to figure out, how do the athletes get from here to here, and how do, I'm like, you have to think through those things.
Definitely. But also things like, how does a Q&A session work?
Yeah,
it's obvious
exactly.
to those that have been turning up for these things for years. But imagine, the first time you attend a scientific congress and you're wondering why there are people leaping up in the aisles to get to microphones, or but nowadays you can ask questions through an app, for example. So if you are that first time attendee, so yeah, I mean, things like how to collect your special meal is absolutely something that features in our Congress guide. And I think we will definitely add a section around food waste, around communication, and how, if we don't know your requirements, then we can't help you, and we are here to help you. So, yeah.
One of the things I remember when Vancouver Convention Center opened, and this is just another idea too, is that they did napkins and signage throughout the convention center talking about how sustainable they were. And they talked about, there was a napkins and like, hey, did you know that there were this many clams that live underneath the convention center? Because it's built over water as well. And so they shared that knowledge on the beverage napkins that were being passed out, when you pick up your drink or your appetizer or whatever. And so I think that was a very unique way. I mean, it's not necessarily sustainable in these, are they compostable napkins or whatever, but at least it's a unique way to distribute and educate people on what you're doing, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
How has your team, witnessing you eat or not being able to eat, how do they approach menu designs now?
With a lot more attention to detail, thank goodness. Yeah. Because they know that when it gets to me, I'm going to ask the usual questions. So they're asking those questions before it even gets to me, which is very satisfying. But, I think also, I've always been an advocate for, do we really need to have, for example, a gluten-free biscuit during the coffee break? Is there a biscuit or a cake that everybody could eat? That is gluten-free, that nobody else would notice? That, there are sort of amazing gluten-free brownie recipes, and, as most gluten-free people will know, a lot of gluten-free is perhaps not worth bothering with. So I'm certainly not suggesting that we pass out sandy biscuits for everybody, but there are some amazing recipes out there that nobody would even notice was gluten-free, and just means that you then don't have to worry about whether your gluten-free delegates have got something. And that's just focusing on gluten-free. Obviously you can include dairy-free, nut-free,
exactly,
in the process.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking of my Mary's Gone crackers. I don't know if you can get them in the UK, but Mary's Gone crackers, they've got ones that are complete 14 allergen, no soy. Some of them have soy, but other ones, they're seed-based, and they're delicious crackers. You can get them at Costco and they're so good. You could just use those instead. But it is, and it eliminates that extra step of having to worry from the catering side as well as from the attendee side.
And if you've got a caterer that's willing to work with you on that, I have come across caterers, it'll cost more to do it all gluten-free. Well, will it? Will it actually? Again, coming back to creativity, encouraging our suppliers to think outside the box a bit more. And I think also just remembering that, education goes both ways. Our caterers and suppliers are always teaching us things about the way that they have to manage things. But if we can teach them by bringing our event in and insisting that something is done in a certain way, wouldn't it be amazing if they then learn from that and then roll that out for future events, so that everybody behind us benefits as well? I mean, that's always a conversation I try to have with our suppliers as well.
Exactly. I'm like, I want to buy this book and just send it to all the pastry chefs in the hotels that I'm working in, so that they can come up with ideas for me before I show up. Right. Yeah. So I want to say hello to Perry, Adia, and Velcia, who are on Instagram listening. So if you've got any questions for me or Claire, please let us know, because we're very happy to answer them.
Absolutely.
You're working on a task force for the gluten-free, for dietary restrictions. You've got the task force or the guide for the neurodivergent. What is your future vision? What is your vision for the future inclusive, responsible food and beverage planning for the industry?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Woohoo! Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, again, it all comes back to education. I think as conference planners, we're always astounded that, particularly in the UK, event management courses for students don't really cover the conference industry, which I think is such a shame. You know, they tend to focus on festivals, and as we know, that's, you know, that might be fun for some, but they're so competitive, and you know,
Right.
the reality is that most of them won't get into work on those events. So yeah, maybe we build it into the curriculum from a college level, talking about, you know, not just catering courses but event management
Right.
courses. I don't know whether it is already. I would need to find out. But you know,
I
again,
love
if
that idea.
the
Yeah.
students coming up through the system are already thinking about it, you know, when they're gaining their knowledge and experience, working up through the ranks, you know, that's brilliant if they've got the awareness and
Right.
they're asking the right questions. The future.
Everything labeled the same, you know?
Yeah.
That would be
And
nice.
just being able to trust what information you're given, because I never fully trust. I mean, there are times when you're just so hungry, and again,
Right.
that's a privilege for me with being an intolerance rather than, you know, a severe allergy.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting, you know, sharing the difference between the EU, the UK, and us and the US is that gluten labeling for gluten is not included in the allergen labeling, right? It's a whole separate regulation. And when the EU, and we have wheat on our top 9 list, and you, instead of wheat, you all have cereals containing gluten. So it's totally different labeled in the EU and the UK. So that is one big difference. And the one thing that I found challenging or interesting as well is that a lot of the countries have elected to go by numbers, like 1 means fish and 2 means gluten, and
Yeah.
each country chooses which order they go in differently, right?
Yes. And it relies on everybody to know what those numbers are. So,
Right.
you know, we were organising an event in Czechia last year, and being a UK based company, you know, we're not familiar with what the numbers are because we're not in the EU anymore.
Right.
So, you know, we don't have those systems here. So, you know, it's all very well having the 1 and the 3 and the 5 after something, but if you haven't got the key that explains what the 1 means and what the 3 means and what
Right.
the 5 means, then it's, you know, you may as well just be putting dots afterwards. It's, you know, it's pointless information.
Exactly. And I was going through a menu the other day, 35-page menu, and the key was on page 3 at the very bottom
Oh
left
yeah.
corner. I'm like,
Yeah.
so I'm flipping through this entire menu and trying to figure out, and I wish we would all get the V or the VG, you know,
Oh yeah. Which
I
is
want
which? Yeah.
VG to be vegetarian and I want V to be vegan, right?
Okay.
The 1 word for the shorter word, and, you know, 2
Yeah.
letters for the longer word. I mean, it just, can we just make that standard? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There's a lot of education at every
yes.
stage, I think, that's
Mhm.
needed.
Yeah.
Ongoing.
100% agree. Ongoing education is for sure. And then even though you take your class, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, if you take your online class or your in-person class on allergens and food safety, you need to then go to work and test it out, right? Because it's one thing learning it from a book, right? It's another thing
Yeah.
actually implementing it.
Definitely. And I
Right.
think giving people the opportunity as part of that education to speak to somebody who has one of
Hmm.
those dietary
Hmm.
requirements, you know, to understand their lived experience, and again to then appreciate the impact that that has.
Right. Exactly. Adia just said, write a book, Tracy. Um, yeah, okay. And she said, write a book, sell it to the industry. And I'm like, so I just said, hold me to it, Adia. Um, So yes, ma'am, I will. I've been talking about it for years. Shauna Suko would know that. Okay, so we're coming up to that 45-minute mark. So can I throw some rapid fire questions out at you?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Go.
First, what's the first thing you notice about food and beverage when you walk into an event?
Labeling.
Labeling.
Or
Okay.
lack of it.
Right, exactly. Planner instinct or lived experience, which one guides your food and beverage decisions more?
See, this is a tricky one, because my neurodivergent diagnosis is relatively recent, and in hindsight, I've been delivering events for however long it is now naturally, being sort of drawn towards certain methods of communication or certain levels of detail. And now I understand why. It's because all that time I was building events to kind of suit me,
Okay.
and my need for information and my need for clarity and to have my expectations managed properly. So it's a bit of both. It's lived experience and the need to plan it properly.
Right. Yeah. I think those two things should go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Because for however many years of experience that you have, being able to think through the things and those opportunities that we've experienced to learn from helps us. That's a lived experience at the same time. Yeah.
And like we were saying earlier, all the times it's gone wrong, is always an opportunity to learn, whether it be in our events. Thankfully not too many things have gone wrong, but certainly other events, learning from that, and instead of just being critical and just sort of analyzing it and thinking, okay, so what could have gone wrong here, and how can we make sure that never happens to us?
Right. Exactly. Well, and it reminds me of my Olympic days, and we would sit in things, do the what ifs. What if this happens? What if this happened? And we were thinking about hurricanes and tornadoes. We never thought about COVID, epidemic. We'd never talked about, if a food allergic reaction happened, what, those, we need to think of those what ifs scenarios. Yeah. Which then takes me back to my high school friend, Molly, who used to ask the question, well, what if we didn't brush our teeth every day? But anyway, going in a complete tangent. Okay. 3 more. One thing you wish every event professional would stop doing when it comes to dietary needs.
What do I wish they would stop doing?
Or you could switch it to say start doing.
Yeah, I think again it comes back to education. Instead of just, and you hinted at it at the beginning, actually, instead of just assuming that what that dietary requirement is for that person, pick up the phone, send them an email, and actually have a conversation about how we're going to most successfully support them to attend your event. Because it doesn't take long, and what you'll learn from that conversation will help you then plan effectively. And it may be that person doesn't need anything, in which case, brilliant, you've saved some hassle and time and money. But you may learn something really important. But I think the main part of that is that person then feels important. And that will mean so much to them, that they will, your event's got 8 out of 10 already before they've even turned up. So
yeah. I just got an attendee that's registered and has a chlorophyll allergy. And so I reached and I'm like, okay, I've not heard of that one. So can you please explain? So he appreciated the fact, and he gave me a can and cannot have list. And so, chef's like, I've never heard of that one before. So it's something new, and anybody can be allergic to anything.
And that's what we do with all our accessibility, our delegates who identify themselves to us, is we contact them and just chat through exactly what they're expecting, what they need, and sometimes what they don't want us to do, because that sometimes is as important as what they do. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Going back to that person said, I want to manage it on my own.
Yeah.
So and so, okay, I'm here for you. Let me know how I can support you. Do what you need, but we're here to feed you if you need us. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. What's your ultimate gluten-free comfort food for a long event day or after a long event day?
Oh. What do you mean, like at the end of the while on site, or when I get home?
One.
When I get home, I generally crave, because I've not been eating as well as I would like to, perhaps. I generally have fish and potatoes and loads of green vegetables.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just need that
The
green
nutrients.
veg.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is what
Yeah.
my body tells me I need. Yeah.
Right. No, I have that same feeling too, because the vegetables are very lacking in a lot of the food that we serve. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
minimal. Okay.
Yeah.
And final question. If you could have your dream dinner party that was safe for you, who would you invite to the table?
Ooh. So this actually came up as one of the questions for my team last year. We did a blog on each other and what our favorite things to have on toast and things like that. So I would say, I don't know if you're going to know all of these people, but have you heard of Helen Mirren?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I love Helen Mirren.
Judi Dench.
Yes, of course. Dame Judi Dench.
Definitely Tina Turner. I've been very lucky to see her live in concert twice. So
Nice.
obviously she would have to come back to join us. Kate Adie is my idol journalist. You might not know her, but I very much admired her as a teenager. And then Olivia Colman is a fairly recent person who again is a British actress. I'm not sure whether
short dark hair, right?
Yeah.
Oh, she's phenomenal. Yeah.
And I don't know, they are all, I just love them all as I hope I'm allowed to call them mature women. Obviously Tina is no longer with us, so she's certainly more than mature, but who have really kind of grown. They just sort of don't take any shit from anybody, if I'm allowed to say that. They are strong, independent women, and I would love to have a dinner party with them and just
let's do that. Okay.
Learn from them about how to be yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I thank you so much for being on here, Claire, and for chatting about this. We were chatting about, for anybody who's joining at the end, getting gluten-free right, why it's a responsibility, not just a preference. You can reach Claire on LinkedIn. There's her email address. And what's your website address for everybody?
It is Azura, AZURA, events.co.uk.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for helping me continue to educate. And I look forward to our continued conversations on what we're doing on educating our industry on this, because it needs to be a collaboration. And I like the task. Can I be on your task force from the US?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Count me in.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And I think I'm trying to come to the UK in August, so I will let you know. We can meet in person.
Yeah. Okay. Come to South Devon. I'm about 4 hours out of London, but it's worth the journey.
Okay. Sounds great. I love it. All right. Well, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
You're welcome, Claire. Thank you. And let's turn your experiences into opportunities for the industry to thrive. So, definitely. Yeah. Okay. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Everybody that was on Instagram and LinkedIn, we appreciate you being here. And if you're watching this afterwards, please comment. We will be more than happy to make additional comments back to you. So until next Wednesday, stay safe and eat well. Oh, we got a comment. Hang on a second. Thank you for today's show today's session from Nancy. You're welcome, Nancy. Thank you for tuning in. Everybody stay safe and eat well. Thanks.